Hi, this is Chuck Wolf, and you're tuned in to the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. And today I'm going to be talking with a colleague and friend of mine, Steve Kelner, about his new book. It's a book called Where You Can Lead, The Pentad of Great Leadership. And I'm going to introduce Steve with a little story about Steve that I want to tell you and why I think it's important for you to listen to this interview and to listen to Steve and what he has to say. But one of the things that Steve and I know each other from is something called the Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence in Organizations. And I think Steve has been there as long as I have. It's been a number of years that we've known each other. We go to meetings pretty regularly, twice a year, usually in Boston, although they operate in different locales, sometimes other countries, because we attract people from all over the world who are really deep thinkers and really excellent researchers and several key practitioners in the field of emotional intelligence who gather together to talk about practices, best practices, learnings from the research, changes in what we're thinking and what we're believing and what we think is possible with emotional intelligence, trying to answer some of the confusion that exists in the field. Anyway, one of the times that I was at this meeting, one of the things that really struck me, because there were memorable moments, and Steve's on the line with me, I'll introduce him in a second, but Steve, one of the things that you had said, I think I've told you this, is you had been hired to do some work on diversity, equity, inclusion, back when that was very popular. But anyway, at the time, I remember something distinct that you did that is unique, and I thought, because I've done a lot of work myself with a lot of senior leadership teams, and I've come in for interventions on lots of different kinds of change management or transformational change initiatives, it's often the case that a lot of the senior members are a little uncomfortable, but pretend that they know that we don't need this for us. We just really want to do this with the people below us because that's where it's really needed, and they kind of remove themselves. And I think it's a question sometimes about vulnerability. Sometimes they really do know. I don't want to prejudge everybody, but a lot of times I think they're just a little uncomfortable because they don't know what's coming, really. And one of the things that you did I thought was so remarkable and clever was I remember you, and this stayed with me for a long time, I still think about it, is you talked about this idea of when they said we want to do it for the lower levels in the organization, you said that's fine, but if you don't mind, my colleague and I would like to do several interviews, initial interviews with each of the senior leadership team members and just ask you a couple questions so that we really can help target what we do for you to make sure we get right what you think is needed. And it was a nice way to find out a little bit about them and also to create buy-in, I thought, because I remember you saying that you asked them two key questions, and what I remember was one of the questions was there ever a time when you felt like it was important to belong to a group, to a band maybe, to a team of some kind, maybe a debating team, maybe a sports team, but some group, some maybe college, getting into a job. It's just some place that you thought was very, very important in your life, and you were worried about it, and you got in. And what was that like, and what did it feel like, and what do you remember about it? And I remember you saying something along the lines that people were just kind of, they beamed, they were pride, they showed their pride, they were smiling, they were very happy to tell me about that. And then you asked this question, and you said, and this is the one that I loved. It was like, was there ever a time when you felt like you really wanted it and it didn't happen, and you were turned away, and you had to deal with that? And that, to me, Steve, was I think you said some people, even senior people, had some, kind of welled up in their eyes a little bit with tears. And it was like people remembered about belonging. And honestly, one of the things I'm working on today as we speak is that sort of initiative where I'm intrigued with the idea of the other. How many people have experienced being the other? And I'm hoping that there can be dialogue in this country about what it feels like to be the other. And by talking about it and experiencing it in a similar way to what you told me the senior people experienced when they thought about the time when they didn't get to belong, all of us can really appreciate and empathize with not only being the other, but feeling like when we were the other, in order to try and get past all the biases that we know we have, and a lot of the unconscious biases that exist in us that we don't know we have until they just pop out unexpectedly. But anyway, Steve, so that's one of the things about you that I really, again, that's one of those memorable moments that stays with me. And then when you were talking about the book that you were writing, when I heard you talk about that, I thought, well, you seem to be someone who really understands quite a bit how to take what Dave McClelland, very famous Harvard motivational psychologist, talked about years ago, and led to all of this competency work in organizations. But when people talk about his theory about motivation, and I read in your book that, there's like so many different things that motivate us, but 85% of them fall into categories of achievement, affiliation, and your word influence, for what used to be called power. Anyway, I think it's really brilliant the way you talk about it, because it helped me to understand. I had at one time when I was working at Harvard Business School, I worked for a guy named Tony Athos. And Tony was one of the more brilliant men I've ever met in my life, probably the most brilliant, about organization and human behavior. And when he spoke about it, everybody understood how powerful he was in what he understood about them. So much of what we think of is private to us. I remember being in a meeting with him. It was a Harvard Business School alumni, people from 20 years old to over 100 were in the room. And he gave a speech about what people don't think anyone else knows about what they're feeling and thinking about on each decade, all the way up to 100. And when I walked out of the room, everybody, to a person, no matter what the age level was, how did he know that about me? And he was remarkable, but he stopped working in his 60s. And I said to him, Tony, how can you stop? You are the most gifted person I've ever met in my life, the most brilliant person I've ever seen in the way that you understand and talk about and help other people to understand and learn from and work with organization and individual behavior. He said, Chuck, I've done this a long time, and I'm done. I'm finished. I know it's time for me to do something else, and somebody else needs to do it now. And I think understanding your book, Steve, and reading about it and understanding how his motivations changed over time helped me to understand why that made sense. That was the first time I really understood why he'd stop. And at least that's the way I think about it now. So having said that, I know there's several things you want to talk about. First, I want to just show your book, Where You Can Lead, the pentad of great leadership. And then I want to say, this is some points that you wanted to cover, and I agreed with you. There's more than one kind of leader, and some may suit you better than others. You are likely to be more successful when you are energized by what you are doing, motivated, and you should know where to go and know when to stop. I can't tell you how, and the audience, how many people I've actually spoken with who really don't have any idea about how high they really want to rise. There's so many attractive rewards, incentives to keep going higher, and yet more and more of your life becomes owned by the company that you're part of, or even your own company if you're,
Oh, yeah.
And you just lose less and less of that balance that people say they want. Not everybody really wants it, apparently, but people say they want that balance between work and family. But I thought your book gives great insight for anybody out there who is at the beginnings of being a leader, or somewhere in the middle, or somewhere even close to the top, and where you might want to reside and why you might want to reside there. People can learn a lot about from your book. So if you want to just tell us a little about you and why you wrote this book and what you hope people get from it, why don't we start there, Steve?
Sure. So I'm a CEO of a small company that does strategic advisory mostly on talent and leadership, called Ascent Leadership Networks, which was started basically by myself and a colleague bringing together what we had seen where great leaders developed and where great leaders came from. I'm a motivational psychologist by training. I was one of David McClelland's last students, I believe, like probably in his last 5 or 6, and very fortunate to be there. And my dissertation was on affiliation motivation, for what it's worth, which comes up when we talk about teams. And I spent a lot of time in the executive search industry, where I didn't do executive search. What I did was develop the tools to evaluate leaders and differentiate not just bad from good, but good from great. And that work is what has fed into this book. I started out working at all levels, working at the company McClelland founded, in fact, and then built up the executive levels where there was a lot less work being done. And it just came to me that over the course of many years working to assess and develop leaders, that, sometimes people were making assumptions like, there's one kind of leader, right? Leadership, boom. It's like, well, there's a big difference between a guy who just wants to create big ideas and make sure that somebody is using them, which I call thought leader, versus someone who likes to start little new challenging businesses around, say, new technology, but isn't interested in running a big company, the entrepreneur, versus someone who actually just enjoys working with people and growing them and developing them organically, which I call the people leader. Or there's also people who are basically professional turnaround CEOs. They love change. They love waltzing in, changing everything, and then leaving in 2 years, because once it gets stabilized, it's not a challenge anymore. It doesn't get them fired up, and that might be more of a change leader, right? And then I have the fifth kind, which is the caring leader, someone whose kind of major purpose in life, and I actually just interviewed someone like this last week, is to take care of the people in their organization, to grow the organization, not for the sake of the organization or for money, but for the people who belong to it. And, that seeing those different kinds of leaders has led me to realize that, hey, that's important, right? Because people fall into a trap almost of, well, I want to keep growing. And you were saying, Chuck, people get trapped in their corporates and into their jobs to the point where it feels like this is all you do in life. And that's fine if you enjoy it, right? I mean, if that's your good time, then more power to you. But what I found was there's a lot of people who started up a path, and in American culture, but it's true in a lot of business culture, the assumption is up or out. And what people are overlooking is maybe there's a place to stop. Or maybe there's a place where you do your best work or your happiest work. And this is why my background as a motivational psychologist really supports it, because I'm not just talking about being a good leader, although I am, I'd like to think. It's about being a good leader who enjoys the kind of leadership you're doing, because that gives you more energy, more excitement, more joy, frankly, out of life. And, if you're having to force yourself to do your job every day, ultimately, you're not going to be as good at it. So why not bring those two together anyway?
Well, one of the things that I noticed in your book, Steve, was that you talked about someone that was an extremely successful leader, and he was doing it so well. And then I think after this was something where I remember the story was you were early in your career, I guess. You were like the last facilitator in a group of three. You were just sort of in there learning, and this fella came in.
It was worse than that.
Okay.
It was a program that only needed 2 facilitators, and I was the 3rd facilitator.
And this fellow, in the debrief on understanding his results, I guess for an assessment that was running, that was teaching about motivations, he picked you, and he thought he could pick you so that he could leave early.
Exactly. He thought he could blow me off because I was the newbie, obviously. Yeah.
Right, but then you told the story about how in learning what he learned, again, this is not someone who was a slouch or somebody who was, he was a high performer in his organization. And so this was like, why is he doing this? But it was like, why is he doing a lot of things? I think he got it from the conversation he ultimately had with you, because I think you said to him, how about if I just tell you a little bit about your results before we go? And I think it was an amazing story. And I think if you could share that kind of helps people understand what they might gain from something where they might read your book.
Absolutely. And this was a long time ago now. Mm-hmm. One of the first leadership development, it really was the first leadership program I'd ever done, and fresh out of the box. So 4 days into the program, so we spent time teaching people about motivation and how they led their styles and how that led to creating a good organizational climate, which helped their employees perform. And we were at the point where after we'd given people all this information, we would have a one-on-one conversation with them. Okay, fair enough. And this guy was a very senior manager running a good-sized chemical plant with hundreds of people under him. And when he first came in the program, he walked in sort of slouched, sort of just, sat down. And when we went around the room to introduce, he said, well, I don't know why I'm here because I'm planning on retiring this year. So this is really a waste of everybody's time, which is a great way to start a development program.
Yeah,
and
it sets the tone for everybody else, unfortunately, too, when that happens.
Oh, yeah. The younger managers are like, geez, what's with this guy? And worse, he actually started connecting with some of the older managers, and they formed this little cluster of people who refer to themselves as the golden oldies. Okay, I mean that, and we would be trying to teach them things. They'd be sitting around snarking to each other,
right,
quietly, because they were British. At least they were polite. And then what happened was, all through the program he was like this. I mean, he participated. He was fine, but he wasn't really engaged. So, as you said, he had picked me to do his one-on-one feedback, and which startled me because I figured that he would want maybe my boss or the member of his organization that was the co-leader of the program. But he picked me because he thought he could blow me off. And he said, I'm planning on retiring, so if you want to, we can just skip this. And it's like, oh, no, I was a brand new consultant. I had to do my job. So I said, look, as long as you're here, let's look at your data. And we had a whole way to go at it. So we would start with, what kind of environment were you creating for your people, the organizational climate? His people were charged up. They were clear on their purpose and their task. They were empowered to act. They felt like they were being challenged, but not too much. They felt like they were really part of a strong team. They felt like they didn't have a lot of red tape. I mean, it was great, outstanding climate. They thought he was great to work for. I said as much. I said, your people must love working for you. He sort of shrugged. And then we moved backward from the data, was the way we did it. So we start with the outcomes kind of and move back. And then we said, well, let's look at your styles of management. And he was really good at giving people the big picture, giving them balanced feedback. He invited their input and he used it. And he developed his team whenever he could, and he worked with them to solve problems. Explained why his working environment was so positive, right? Because you could see the straight line from there. He involved them, he informed them, he encouraged them, he empowered them. They loved working for him. So I thought, all right, I know what his motives are. And you mentioned the three. My assumption was he was going to be strongest, as many managers are, in influence motive, because that meant he was motivated by the desire to influence people to get great impact, yada, yada, yada. And probably second on achievement, driving for results. And then relatively low on affiliation, because it wasn't about his being friends with them, it was about him leading them. Mm-hmm. And I was flat wrong. His profile was basically all achievement and single digits on the other two. He was like in the 90th plus percentile on achievement motive, which is very high. Mm-hmm. And I looked at it and trying to think, how do I explain this? And I thought about it, and I turned to him and I said, this says that you hate your job. He sort of blinked at me because he didn't expect me to give a comment like that, right? I mean, maybe a little short on tact. And I said, look, I pointed to the other documents. This shows you have learned how to manage. You have learned how to behave in a way that will empower and engage your people, and you did a good job. So they kept promoting you because you did a good job managing. You do it great. Your people love working for you, but it's not because you enjoy managing. So this says you would rather be maybe an entrepreneur or go back to being an engineer, because he was a chemical engineer by training. It was a chemical manufacturing company. And so, or just basically working alone. But you make yourself do this. None of it is coming out of what you enjoy. It's all what you force yourself to do. And he paused. He said, you have just explained my entire life.
I love that line in the book.
Right. Yeah. And, I cut pretty deep. And he was actually kind of dazed. And I said, look, I think you should go home and talk about this with your wife. You know how to do this job. If you want to keep doing this job, you can do it. But it's costing you. So you need to think about what you want to do. And he left, wobbling a little. And here's the thing. I already knew they weren't going to let him retire early. Because I had consulted with, remember I said one of the other colleagues was from the company.
Right.
And he said, no, he's too good. They're not going to let him retire early. We're using that to get rid of deadwood.
Right.
And I'm thinking, okay. But the next day, he strode into the room. He didn't slouch. He was upright. He was energetic. He walked right up to me. And I got a glimpse of just kind of why his team loved him so much, right? He showed that energy that I hadn't seen in the classroom. And he went to me and said, I thought about what you told me all night. And I've decided that if they don't let me retire, I'm going to quit. Now, remember, he was a very valuable employee. And I'm thinking,
and you're brand new to the company, right?
Yeah, oh, God. They're going to.
That's not why they hired me. Right.
Right. But, then he said, because I can't live like this anymore. And I said, okay, I did the right thing. Ultimately, it didn't matter whether he was doing a good job at the company. He hated his life. He had gone on to say, I was blaming the company. That's why I wanted to retire early. That's why I was so cynical and why I was so miserable. I thought they'd put me in this awful position. It wasn't them at all. It was me. This is the wrong place for me. So
let me stop you there. It's a great story, Stephen. I asked you to tell it because I want people to understand that it's not always about what you're best at. It also has to do with what you really value, what motivates you, what energizes you, what you really feel good about doing. And I think that's such a critical point for people when they're thinking about, what do I really want to do in life? Because a lot of times the guidance you get from career people and advisors is often, what are you good at?
Yeah.
Right?
Just do what you're good at. And it's like, lots of people learn how to do things they don't particularly enjoy. You know?
Right.
So
anyway, that's a powerful story. So one of the other things I thought, Steve, was you talk about it, and maybe let's spend a little bit of time on the 3 different motives that are key and the way that you think about that, because I think not a lot of people understand that, and I think it's important in order to get the most benefit from this conversation today and also from your book. I think if you want to just talk about achievement, affiliation, and influence and what those are, if you could give us some definitions on those.
So this is not what, when somebody says what motivates you, you normally call what you think is important, what you have consciously decided or you've been trained or learned or grew up with, your values. But what we're talking about is the implicit motivation, the emotional drives, the deeper part of the brain. And there have been the early work on this, it goes back a long, long time. 1938 was when Henry Murray first proposed a list of about 50. But what David McClelland found, to his endless credit, is there's only about 3 that occupy most of people's thinking time. And you alluded to that. 85% of daily thinking time is basically just these 3. And thank God, because, Dave correctly pointed out, how many people have 50 different emotions driving them? They do not. So everybody's got all these 3, but they're all at different levels. And because they're so deep, it means they're very stable throughout your life. They can change slowly. They don't go down, but they can be increased. But it's hard. So it's very much a fundamental part of who people are and what drives them. But the deadly thing about this is that it's unconscious. Because it's so deep, people are not always aware of it. So here are the 3. Achievement motive is the drive to do things better. And it's not about making other people better. It's about, I want to make things better. I like being hands-on. I like to measure how I'm doing so I know that it's better. People with this motive tend to set moderate goals because that's your best chance of actually being better and seeing it happen, right? If it's a high risk, you're unlikely to see it. And if it's a low risk, it doesn't teach you anything. They tend to invest in their long-term learning. They like doing do-it-yourself projects, and they often become people like entrepreneurs to do something new, or salespeople to hit goals all the time, or finance people, right? And I'm simplifying here. I say people with a lot of achievement motive. Then there's affiliation motive, which is not about professional affiliations. It's about personal affiliation. These are people who get energized by having personal relationships with others, or belonging to a group. And it's less common as a need for business, but I do see it. What I think it does is it helps hold organizations and teams together, where you don't just enjoy the work, you enjoy being part of the group. And it can be personal as well as professional. And I'm biting my tongue because I did a whole dissertation on subtypes of this. Maybe we'll come back to that another time. The third is influence. And you did say that in the academic literature, it's given the name power, and that has caused us more heartburn than I care to think about, because it sounds negative to an American or to anyone, an English speaker, or for that matter, a German speaker, because people think power and they think manipulation. So I think influence, it's getting a charge or an energy out of seeing other people respond to you. And that could be coaching, it can be managing, it can be being a minister, or it can be being a leader, right? Or it can be being a writer, because my previous book was on motivating writers, and that turned out to be a really critical factor. Why do you write a book? To be read. So those three, everybody's got them, and to greater or lesser extent. So
let me stop you for a second, and I'd like to comment on a couple of them. So for me, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So one of the things that I wanted to comment on is on the influence. It's very interesting because over the years, when I've been a keynote speaker, and I used to start the conversation with the audience by asking people to raise their hands about how many people are comfortable manipulating somebody else. Because whenever I talked about emotional intelligence and how you change people's emotions, people sometimes went there. They started to think, well, that's manipulation. So I'd start a conversation with an audience by asking how many people, and almost nobody would raise their hand. A few people would, and you'd get a few chuckles. But most of the time, people wouldn't raise their hands, even if they were comfortable with it, by the way, because they didn't want to be seen doing that.
Yeah, of course. You don't admit that. Yeah.
But then I'd ask, okay, how many of you are comfortable influencing somebody else? And almost everybody in the audience, no matter the size of the audience, would raise their hand and say, yeah, I'm sure. Well, have you ever looked up the definition? Because they're the same. When you're looking up in the dictionary, the influences can be described in some dictionary definitions as manipulation, and manipulation is often described in some dictionaries as influence. And I think the point is for people is influence is, at least in your mind when you're influencing, you think you're doing it for the other person and you. It isn't just about you. And when you're manipulating somebody, it might be about the other person, but that doesn't matter really. It's just about whether you get whatever it is that you think you need done. And so it feels very different. And I think even when people are thinking that they're influencing, they might be manipulating from the other person's point of view, but I think it sort of breaks down that way. I think the word power, is, to your point, has far more negativity attached to it, and I think some words, sales for some people has an emotional baggage attached to it. I don't want to be in selling, and yet everybody who has a product or a service or something that they want other people to use are selling. So, but I think it's the same kind of thing.
I totally agree. In any professional service firms, if you ask somebody what they do, they don't sell; they market. Somehow that doesn't feel the same, right? So
right.
But
so words matter, I guess.
Words definitely matter, and I think of it in some ways as speaking to people in the language they will understand and appreciate. People with influence motive and high emotional intelligence are really good at that, right? And it does matter to have the emotional intelligence, since we met at the Committee for Research into Emotional Intelligence in Organizations. I feel compelled to mention that because I've also known people who are very high in influence motive and were utterly inept at influencing people. There's a difference between the motive and the ability. So that's why it's more, and that was one of the other points in my book, is that you have to be able to do certain things. It's not enough to want to do them. You have to be able to do them. So you need to learn the behaviors necessary to step up.
Let me tell you one other just about achievement, because this is an interesting one for me too. And then I'll ask you to tell a story yourself. On achievement, I had a senior vice president I was called in to work with at a company, a very large scale corporate financial services company. And he was in charge of sales for the life division. It was life insurance in that particular part of the company. And he was outstanding, and people loved working for him. Inside his group, he was seen as tough, but fair, and is hardworking. He was a hardworking person, and he never asked anybody to do anything he wasn't willing to do himself. And he achieved great success in bringing in large numbers of sales, much higher than expectations every year. But the
Wow.
CEO called me in to work with him because he ran roughshod over the people that had to support him because they were never good enough. They never were able to keep up with what his salespeople promised customers. And in part, Steve, it was like, well, how could they if you keep coming in and exceeding what the organization plans for in terms of number of sales, and you keep doing more, and the staff isn't able to keep up, and
Yeah.
and so how are we going to fix that? Because that's not acceptable the way you're dealing with it. Nor do I understand that you want to change how you're dealing with it because I mean, why are you trying to sell more if nobody's going to support it? So I mean, something has to change. But when I actually I was using an assessment, the Mesquite at the time. This is the Mayo Salve Crucial Emotional Intelligence Test, and one of the things that I saw about him was he was incredibly skilled at what you might call the affiliation part of that, which was managing other people's emotions and managing his own emotions. On management of emotions, he was great. He was great actually at all of it. And so the question wasn't, does he have the skill, but what is he using it? And he wasn't with the other groups. And I said, you're so talented and you're so good, and the people that work for you see that, but you don't seem to want to use it in the other parts of the organization. He said, that's not my responsibility. I don't want to. First of all, I don't have to be accountable for that on one hand, and second, I think if I was managing that and somebody else intervened in my organization, I wouldn't necessarily welcome that. And so I said to him, "Let me ask you a key question." His name was Dennis. I said, "Dennis, do you want to achieve more?" I said, "Absolutely. What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I think if I can help you achieve more, I think we can make this work better." And I think by what I'm going to suggest, given your skill set and your ability, I think you could take your affiliation skills, if we're talking about it in this way, your ability to relate to others and demonstrate your caring in order to influence them. And I think you can do that by going first to the senior member of the department saying, I know I've got a tough reputation with your folks. Would you mind if I took some of them out to lunch and started a visit with them and just informally start to make connections and, let them know that I do appreciate the work that they're doing for us. And I understand when we oversell and we come in way ahead of schedule that it's hard for them to keep up, but I do appreciate it when they're able to help. It changed everything for him, Steve. Everything changed once he bought into that. And it was because I understood the need for achievement, and I tied it to what was going to make it different. So like Richard Boyatzis talks about, it became intentional change, and it wasn't just compliance. It was his idea of being the best possible version of himself at that point, at that time in that organization.
And you tied it to his motivation. So in essence, you put it into terms. Someone else might say, why are you being mean to people? And he would say, I'm not being mean to people. What you said is, here's how you would perform even better. And that got his attention. Whenever I give feedback and coaching to people, I always look for their motive hook, because then I'm appealing to their heart, not their head. And it means I can push their emotional hot button. And that's exactly what you did. I actually have given feedback to a lot of consultants over the years who have moved into management positions and are not doing well for exactly the way you're describing. And I think there's another issue related to motivation. They just not motivated to use it internally. All their emotional intelligence gets sent to their clients. So they come back in the office and act like jerks. And I was coaching one guy who had moved from consulting into management, and he didn't really know how to deal with it. And I said, look, think of your employees as your clients. Does that change the way you think about things? And I could just see the wheels turning.
It's another great way to talk about it, right? Right?
Yeah. Well, they talk about servant leadership, which is a nice phrase. But for someone who is a very skilled consultant working with clients and building relationships, that nailed it for him,
So there's another person I want to see if we have a few minutes to talk about, because I think it kind of captures some of the other things you talked about. Well, on the one hand, achievement sounds like what you'd want, certainly, at least at a high enough level for anybody in any organization, right? Yep. But then sometimes I think people lose sight of the other issues, like the fellow you talked about. He learned how to manage in ways that it worked for everybody, and he understood the importance of, if I say people are my most important asset and treat them like they're not, I'm not going to get the kind of performance I want, and because I care about achievement, I'm going to do that. But then you talked about this market basket at Arthur T and Arthur S, and I thought that was a fascinating story too. And it was I think is that a worthwhile story to talk about in light of helping people understand those motivations?
Yeah, it might be, because I think he's a caring leader, and it's interesting to note he just got fired again by the board. Yeah, because
Wow.
he doesn't.
Okay.
He's not good at managing his family, and they're suing. And again, I mean, yeah. So
Well,
to back up,
you want to give the backdrop on it first, I guess, so people know what we're talking about.
yeah. So Market Basket is a local chain here in New England of grocery stores. Now, grocery stores are not widely known for treating their employees with great respect. I mean, no offense to them, but Market Basket is unusual. They take care of their people. They give them benefits right down to the bag boys. And part of this is because of the leadership of the CEO, Arthur Demoulas. And I think I got that name right. I'm going to check it. But what he did was he invested, frankly, in the people. And that was very powerful. And there are people who work there for decades. Arthur Demoulas. Because they loved working there and they loved working with him. And he brought that into sort of caring about the people, but also caring about their customers. And what happened was his family co-owned the company, right? So I went back to actually the guy who founded it. Basically, he had a pair of them, and there were two kids, one from each one, both named Arthur, which is confusing. And one of them became the CEO, and that's this guy, and he was amazing. The problem was that the rest of the family apparently wanted to sell out. All right? Mm-hmm. And his cousin, the other Arthur, kind of wanted to sell the chunk. It's thought that they wanted to sell it to private equity, which would have probably destroyed the whole culture of the company. What they wanted to do was start laying people off and maximizing the profit to make the value of the company higher. Now, let me point out that the CEO had took over in 2008. In a few years, he increased revenue from $3 billion to $4 billion and grew the employees from 14,000 to 25,000. And that was in just like 3 or 4 years, which is amazing. Right? Yeah. But he was also the kind of person who remembers everybody's name. He attended people's weddings and funerals. He checked in on ill employees. And this was a very affiliative guy. I mean, people said, there were times somebody's wife went in for a difficult operation. He called him and said, do we need to get her a better doctor? Because I'll get her a better doctor if this one isn't good enough.
Right. I thought that was a great story. Yep.
Yeah. And what happened was they fired him in 2014. And one of the issues was members of the board voted to distribute $250 million to family shareholders rather than to the employees, because they actually do profit sharing. And the CEO, Arthur, was opposed, so they fired him. This is the only time I've ever heard this happen. The employees went on strike to save the CEO. Wow. How often have you heard that happen?
No, I don't know that I have. I don't know that I have, right?
They thought, and I think rightly, that the board had put money before people because they'd chosen to pay shareholders instead of reinvesting in the business, and were afraid that the leadership would cut their benefits, their wages, their profit sharing, everything that made them a special place. And there was a walkout, a massive walkout. And Market Basket sales fell by 70% because not just the employees, but people in the community said, we don't want to do this either. I mean, because it actually won the whole community over. And the people who'd taken over fired all the people. And so Arthur, the CEO, former CEO, made his first statement, and his first statement was not about him. It was he wanted the employees to be reinstated. And when they weren't, protests expanded. Managers and assistant managers from 68 of their 71 stores presented a petition stating they would resign if the CEO was not reinstated. And they tried various things. They offered people a chance to come back. They held a job fair. Then they had a final warning that employees had to come back or be fired. This is not legal. So the Massachusetts state government swung in And of the hundreds of employees who received the ultimatum, not one went back to work.
Wow.
So remember, the company was going to be sold. The only remaining bidder at that point was Arthur T. DeMoulis, the original CEO. Everyone else had withdrawn their offers. So he bought the company, and he stepped back in as CEO. And he's been there until very recently, where the board apparently managed to try to fire him again. It's starting all over again. But here's the thing. Obviously, his employees loved him. He was a caring, what I call a caring leader, huge amounts of affiliation. When he came back, he gave a speech, and the speech is not about him. He starts out by saying, all I can say, it's great to be back together again. Words cannot express how much I appreciate each and every one of you. Words cannot express how much I miss you. Words cannot express how much I love you. That's affiliation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Look at that. And I wanted to make the point that affiliation leaders can be successful too, because sometimes people feel like you can't. You have to be the achievement leader.
You don't. Yeah. The other place I saw affiliation leaders actually is in Catholic healthcare, because I did a lot of work with Catholic healthcare CEOs, a lot of whom were nuns or not, but many of them were there to carry out, as they put it, the healing mission of Christ. That's not an influence motive necessarily. And it was a core driver for a lot of them. And interestingly, sometimes you can have affiliative leaders who get worried about hurting people's feelings. That's a category of affiliation. It's not all the kinds of affiliation. It's like saying all influence motivated people are manipulative. They're not. So I find there's some people who are all about, I have to give you some tough feedback because I care about you, because it's important that you hear it.
Right.
In fact, I once coached a colleague who was very anxious about giving feedback, and it was trying to help him do it in a way that he felt comfortable with. And he wound up figuring this out and passed it on to me, which I share, which is, think of that person as your best friend in the world. You may have to tell them something that will make them uncomfortable, but if you're their friend, you're going to make sure they know. That's affiliative. That's not influence. It's not achievement.
Hey, Steve, listen, I'm really enjoying this. I know I'm going to have to end in a couple of minutes here. I do want to say a couple of things about your book and encourage people to buy it, because I think one of the things that I think is really important to understand is you might fall at different places in your life currently where you might be thinking about being an entrepreneur, working in a corporate environment. The couple stories we told, a lot of the corporate environments, sometimes one of the thing about capitalism that I love is that it offers everybody an opportunity. The thing that's problematic, but it's true of any kind of system, is when greed takes over, and that can happen. And so the thing to be wary of is, are you in an organization where you feel supported, where you feel cared about? They exist, but not all of them are like that, and it isn't the same from one organization to another. But wherever you fall in the leadership spectrum, if you're wondering where to go next, what to do next, or if you're just in college and thinking about where you want to be and what kind of leader you want to be, I think, Steve, your book offers a wealth of information about possibilities and things to explore. And I really like at the end, you have a developmental process that no matter where you are, you can look at those steps and say, if I do want the next step up, how do I walk through these developmental steps to get there? And I think you provide lots of foundational information that is all in one place because of your rich experience and the way you tell the stories. I think are really powerful. That's what I want to say about it. Now, Steve, you want to just say any last closing comments yourself and where people can buy your book?
You can buy it in all the usual places. I mean, online, and if it's not in your bookstore, you can ask for it, because it's, so, and please do, because then they'll put it in the store for other people. It's both electronic and audio forms as well, if you're the kind of person who likes to listen in your car. And thank you, because, what I'm trying to do with this is, I think everyone likes to think of themselves as a leader. I want to show how they can be that leader, with the understanding that there are different kinds. You just have to find the right kind for you, and give people the stepwise ability to move up where they want to go, as far as they want to go, and still remain happy and energized. Because I do think that having great satisfaction in work is something worth having. We spend too much time at work not to enjoy it.
Right. And I did. I know you and I chatted a bit about the idea that sometimes people talk about a work-life balance, and one of the things to be very conscious of is sometimes people are finding themselves enjoying the achievement so much or the
Yeah,
influence so much at work that they spend more time than they have to there. And trying to create a balance sometimes is about you, and it's also about the family you have or the people in your life that are missing you too. So trying to
absolutely.
find that balance is really worth thinking about. I know. I think it's an old sort of management joke that nobody on their deathbed says, "Geez, I wish I spent more time at the office." I don't know if that's actually true or not. That they actually
Yeah,
wish
I
they.
don't either.
Right,
I've,
right.
I've seen too many people who say, "Oh yes, I want to spend more time with my family." Then why did you just take a job that makes you travel 70% of the
Oops,
time? Because
I
fundamentally they
lost the
don't want
connection.
to. And remember,
I
it's
don't know what
also
happened.
the motive is
I
not
guess the
conscious.
connection's gone. But let me just say, I want to say
Oh,
thank you to Steve. But I will end. I will end with this story. The story is something along the lines that when somebody I know, I shadowed one time because they were having trouble breaking away from work, and they were saying, "I just got so much I have to do, and I'm finding it hard to be home with my kids, etc." And then what actually happened was that the person I shadowed at the end of the day, when work was over and before he went home, he went around to all the people in his office and he kept asking people, "Do you need anything from me? Because I'm about to leave, but I can stay if you need something." And it was almost like he was looking for somebody to say to him, "Hey, yeah, I could use your help. Would you stay for a little longer?" He didn't seem to
yeah.
really want to leave. And so I encourage all of you as you think about it, especially during this holiday season, um, manage that well. Even if you find yourself really enjoying being at work and loving it, there's also a family that you're a part of and a personal life that you want to think about in terms of finding some balance. And it isn't just about you, it's also about others. So I encourage everybody over the holidays to have a wonderful Christmas, a wonderful New Year's. And I want to say thank you very much for the time we've been together. And thank you for tuning in and listening. I'm Chuck Wolf. You've been listening to the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. And I'm going to close now. Thanks, everybody. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everyone.